Allison James International, and I co-manage Southern California with my managing partner, R.J. Jeremio, for Movement Mortgage. And I just wanted to reiterate and remind that we entered into a wonderful partnership with Allison James in June of this year as your national lending partner. We are available to support you with your clients from Southern California. Additionally, I know that after this week, hopefully there'll be a page available to all of you as well on the Allison James website with contact info to all of our loan officers and their availability. I wanted to just reiterate a couple of the value propositions that Movement Mortgage brings to the table in terms of adding value to your businesses and serving your clients. First and foremost, we have 6 to 24-hour underwriting. Depending on the complexity of the file, pardon me, we typically will have an underwriter's decision within 24 hours. Our loan officers, being proactive, being very professional, typically have most of our conditions clear to close within 7 days, at which time they can leverage that on your behalf with listing agents on offers that your buyers have written to validate the integrity of the approvals, as well as to reinforce that we can close and hopefully enhance your chances of having your offers accepted. Additionally, through Allison James Corporate, through Victoria, we are offering some support with marketing materials for you guys, open house flyers, open house support. There is some additional graphic work that AJI Corporate is providing in terms of email signatures and things like that. If you're interested in any of those items or to discussing exactly how we can support you specifically, because I know we all have unique needs, please feel free to reach out to me at Frank Thomas, 619-227-9933, and also via email at frank.thomas@movementmortgage.com. And lastly, I'd like to share with you some very exciting news we received yesterday regarding algorithms that are used to determine credit scores. FICO, Fair Isaac's company, which manages the algorithms used for mortgage financing, announced yesterday that they're no longer going to look at open collections in a negative. And what that means is that typically in the past, if your borrowers had open, and when I say open collections, I'm being very specific, medical collections, if your borrowers had medical collections, from the time those collections were paid, it typically took 12 to 18 months of seasoning before we saw an improvement in credit. As of October 1st, once a collection is paid, you will see an immediate bump in score, and they're anticipating once those medical collections have been taken care of by your clients, that we should see a 15 to 25 point increase in credit score, which again gives you guys an opportunity to go back into your past databases to reach out to some of those folks who may not have qualified a year ago and put them in touch with a Movement Mortgage loan officer who can walk them through the process of getting them pre-approved, again creating some business opportunities for all of you in the field. So again, if that's something again that is of interest learning more about, feel free to reach out to me directly per the information provided, and I think Victoria can as well email out the information as it relates to how to contact me. But again, we're grateful to be your partners. We're looking forward to the opportunity to earn your business. We're very excited going forward. And additionally, I'd like to extend that we're extending our special that we've been running for the last 2 months, that during the months of September and October, Movement Mortgage will pay all closing costs on FHA and VA loans at prevailing market rates. So again, it's a great advantage and a great benefit to your buyers who may be a little cash strapped. We'd be happy to invest in their future as well as you closing the transaction. So again, we look forward to the opportunity to work with you, and I hope you all enjoy the webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. Jeff, would you like to take over?
Yes, thank you, Victoria, and good morning to everyone out there in the real estate world. Just happy to have you all on the webinar today, and if you wouldn't mind, let's practice the use of the question tool. I like to do this every webinar, get a shout out from everybody in terms of where you are. First of all, your name and where you are. So if you could go to the questions section. I'll be talking about some things while you're doing that, and put in your name. So for me, I would put Jeff Green, Oakdale, and if you're listening with somebody else, put your name and then a comma and the other person's name and what city you're in. And let's find out where people are this morning, because I can't see exactly what city you're in, and I'd like to see that. And while you're doing that, I want to give you a few nuts and bolts things and some housekeeping issues. First of all, internally with our own company, we're seeing just a huge growth in the amount of transactions this time of the year. So it's a really busy year. So if you wonder what's going on, production's up. There's a lot of great, excuse me, a lot of great things going on. I'm going to ask everybody except me to mute their mic because we're getting a little scratchy noise in the background. So there's a lot of transactions going on, and what you guys want is to be able to get from the opening of your transaction to paycheck as quick as possible. So I've had a few questions about rejected documents during the review process. I want to remind you that if you remember this rule, whatever you put in SkySlope is not just for me, but it's also for whoever's going to look at the file a year from now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, an auditor. So your job isn't just to get the documents in there, but to tell the story. I've had situations like this where I look at an addendum and I'm trying to figure out, well, what's this related to? Is this addendum associated with the purchase contract? I've had addenda to the listing agreement put in the transaction documents, and it's not indicated on there, or an addendum to the request for repairs is mentioned on the request for repairs. I can't find it anywhere, and it somehow ended up down in the wrong folder. So you don't want that happening during an audit. That's really inconvenient. So remember, whatever you do, present your file as if somebody's reading it and they've never seen it before. If I think that it's going to cause any confusion to anybody, I'm going to kick it back to you. Another thing is, if you have a document that's been fixed, for instance, we have sometimes somebody will put in the statewide buyer and seller advisory, and we know that's 12 pages long. They're missed initial on a page, and they leave them both in there. And so I have to go through the entire document to find if it's correct, but not only that, I have to find out which one's the incorrect document because I have no way of knowing. So take the incorrect one out, leave the correct one in. So that's enough of that, nuts and bolts. Let's talk about the market a little bit. If you're not aware, we are at kind of the late season of the summer buying season, and in most areas in Northern California, the market's softening. So what does that mean? It means that the latecomers to the market are putting their houses on the market now, and if you're out showing property, you're probably finding your buyers have a lot more to choose from than they did in April, May, and June. So what does this mean? If this trend continues, we're going to see more of a buyer's market than a seller's market. In other words, there'll be more inventory to pick from. It doesn't necessarily mean that the seller will have complete control of the market, but the buyer will have more choices. But it will mean this: as we see longer days on the market and a longer time for homes to get sold, it might mean that it'll take you longer to get paid as a listing agent than you would as a buyer's agent. So I want to encourage everybody, there's all this talk out there, always be the listing agent. I want to encourage you to think about working with buyers and get a good buyer strategy for the winter, because the winter and the fall are usually good times to work buyers because houses sit on the market longer. Don't turn down a listing, obviously, but if you can pick up some good buyers that are highly motivated, it's a good time to work buyers. A couple more things real quick. This is in regards to legal matters. Most of you heard earlier this year that the BRE was requiring that agents retain all texts and tweets. So if you're texting a client, you have to save all those text messages, download them, store them. We recommended at that time that you put them inside of SkySlope in the conversation log as an attached document or in the documents section. Well, now there's been a reversal on that. There's a clarification of what constitutes a record, and you're not required to keep all of those anymore. Do you want to? It might be a good idea. It might not. It depends on the situation. If you're getting text messages about arranging for appointments, or somebody says, gosh, I really liked your dog when I saw you walking your dog down the street the other day, those are probably not important. But if it's substantive to the transaction, you may want to still store it. Another issue that I want to bring up is the BRE has now started, effective July 1st, their cite and fine policy. What this means is that you can be cited by the BRE for up to $2,500, and this has to do with things like not putting your license on your license number on advertising, emails, things like that, or not changing your address. If you don't change your address on the BRE website and they try to find you, they can't find you because your address is wrong. When they do find you, they're going to cite you up to $2,500. So your resolution for that is to go to a hearing. So guilty till proven innocent is how that's going to work. So just a couple more items, but Victoria, do we have anybody that's responded to our shout out?
Yes, we have quite a few. Would you like me to read some of them off, Jeff?
Yeah, let's see who's out there.
Okay, we have Robert Hazenberg in Manteca. We have Barbara Garrett in Cameron Park. John Bartell from Roseville. We have Mike in El Dorado Hills. Rick in San Diego. Connie in Cameron Park. Teresa Fluellen in Herald. Stephanie Fillinger in Truckee. Anita Rosado in Modesto. Karen Miller in Placerville. And Keely Anderson in Oakdale.
Keely Anderson in Oakdale. Wow, that's close to me. Very, very close. So, all right. So today we're going to do a very interesting topic, and it is on the contingency for sale or purchase of other property document. You'll find it in your zip forms. If you haven't used it yet, you're going to be using it, and known as the COP form, COP. And what I've done today is I've asked one of our agents, who happens to be a broker as well and has years of broker experience, to give his thoughts on the COP, because he's kind of a forms fanatic. And that agent is Steve Rowe. I've asked him to be a guest panelist today. And this is the first in the series of guests that I'm going to bring in from our company. I want to feature an agent once a month. They may share a little, they may share a lot, depends on what they have to share. But every day, almost every day, I experience the benefit of talking to agents who have a specialty in a specific area. It could be a specific type of marketing, a specific type of understanding of paperwork, or maybe something that they've done that's been really effective, or maybe they brought something up that hasn't been common for a while. I had a big discussion with an agent the other day about the demand to close escrow. And if I see a real-life situation where that's been effective, I'm going to pull that agent into our discussion, because I'd like you to meet them. I'd like to have better connections between our agents, and I'd like to encourage peer-level support where we can start helping each other out, knowing each other, finding out what other people do. And Steve Rowe and I talk on a regular basis. He's a phenomenal agent and broker associate with our company. And so I've asked him to prepare a little presentation, and I'm gonna come in at the end, and we're gonna have a little dialogue on it. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Steve right now. So from Cameron Park, Steve Rowe.
All right, hi everybody. Glad to be a part here. I'm going to bring up my own screen and show you a little bit of what we're dealing with here and with this COP. The way I got to know the COP is I was the broker for a 200 agent office in a fairly affluent area in Southern California for a few years. And the contingencies, this particular form happens to be used, a lot in those types of areas, and especially as we were coming out of the market in 2010, 11, and 12. The whole issue with the contingency form, whether it's being used for a buyer selling their home or for a seller wanting a home of choice contingency, is a matter of risk. It's amazing what people will do to avoid having to move twice. My counsel has always been, if you can avoid using this contingency form, avoid it. Because the client, for a buyer having to buy with a contingency, they're in a weaker buying position. For a seller insisting on a home of choice or a replacement home contingency, it's going to limit the number of buyers and the quality of buyer that's going to be willing to write the offer on their home. And so, the use of this form, almost always has some form of a disadvantage, to it. But the reality is there's times when the timing is right. People want to use this thing. I've often said that the COP is the worst written form in the book. And part of it is because any time you involve more than just a buyer or seller in a transaction, the more parties that are involved in a transaction, the more complicated the transaction is going to be. And so, the very fact that you are writing an offer with a contingency means there's automatically 3 parties involved in the transaction and dependent on one another in a transaction rather than just 2. If and there are times where you've got a seller with a home of choice contingency, the home that they're buying as a replacement home, they're almost always using the contingency form as a buyer on that home. And so now you've got a chain reaction of several homes and several transactions that all have to go well in order for the process to get worked out. As a broker, I saw at one point where we had 4 different transactions all stacked onto one another, each depending on the other. And in the middle of it, we had a transaction that went south within about 3 days of close of escrow. And we were able to work that one out with only about a week's delay. But we had people with their property in moving vans, and just before close of escrow, and finding out that they weren't getting the home that they were supposed to be moving into. I want to look at this form in a few different ways. There's one circumstance where this COP form works fairly well, and that's the circumstance down here where if you have your home already in escrow. If the buyer's home is already in escrow, we've got an escrow company, we've got an escrow contract, we have a date ready for the close of the escrow. It's not, we can usually work the timing, and the only issue becomes what do we do down here in Section 6, and that's with what happens if a seller wants to keep the property on the market, and I've got some suggestions for that. The thing that is usually the most often is the case with this one is the property is listed, but it's not yet in escrow. And the biggest hole in this situation is that you've got a buyer who is not certain they're going to be able to fulfill their contract until they get their home into escrow and get that one running. The way this is written, the contingency is the close of escrow on the buyer's property. We all know that. So if you're counseling a seller on this before they accept this, make sure they realize they're accepting a contingency that's going to last virtually the entire process. It's very similar to when we put on a loan contingency till funding. It's saying the seller is going to take the risk throughout the entire escrow process. So sellers need to understand that. But for the buyer, with this particular form, you'll notice there's no slots in here for you to add any other terms. If you look down on the second section where it's the replacement property, they make a provision for time periods to be delayed while the seller is looking for a replacement property. But here in the buyer's contingency, there is no provision made for a delay of the time frames. And so buyers under this scenario are being asked to go ahead and start doing their inspections, get their appraisals, go through that whole process before they have any assurance that they're going to be able to purchase the home. So one of the things I'm going to recommend, and the only place you can do it, there's a blank line. I don't know, hopefully you can see my cursor. There's a blank line right after section 2C, A2C, where you can add their words, either handwritten, or I used a fake Adobe program to write in, see addendum to COP. And on that addendum, I put a couple of different things, and the first one has to do with time periods. Time periods in the agreement for inspection contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, and other obligations shall begin the day after buyer notifies seller in writing that an escrow has been opened for their contingent property. So this allows a little bit of time, 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, whatever number you want to negotiate here. I think 17 is typically, in most markets, isn't enough to have a good chance of getting your home in escrow at a decent price. So I usually recommend at least 30 here. But to have the time frames for the new escrow, this way you can write your purchase agreement for a 30-day or a 45-day escrow, and you know that that period won't start until the second home, till the contingent home goes into escrow. The only alternative to that would be to write a 60 or a 75-day escrow on your original contract, but still your buyers are going to be obligated to start spending money on the new home before they know that their home is in contract. So I recommend trying to work out a delay in the time frames for the contract to allow time for this one to go in to escrow. The second issue comes down to this section 6. 6A, the immediate right to notify buyer to remove the contingency, says that at any time the seller can, if the seller has a new offer that they want to accept, they can give a 3-day notice to the buyer to remove this contingency and actually several other things, or get out of the contract and let the seller move on. So under that provision, the seller can essentially pull the rug out on the buyer, literally a day or two after, they accept the contract. The alternative to the other extreme, asking the seller to take all the risk, would be this last box checked, where the seller doesn't have a right, to exercise this during this term of the agreement, so that the buyer is protected all the way throughout the agreement. The middle ground, usually one that tries to balance the rights and the risks for both parties, is to come up with a time frame where the seller will not exercise their 6A right, to notify the buyer for a period of time to allow the buyer a reasonable time to get their home into escrow. But if their home doesn't go into escrow during that reasonable time, then it would default to 6A. But here's the problem with 6A. What happens when the buyer is going to remove this contingency, or the buyer agrees? Because a buyer may be putting this on because they would prefer to sell their house to buy the new one, but it's possible that they could rent their house out. It's possible they could get financing. So there's a chance they could still do it. But what they're asking them to do is, 1, remove the contingency, and then 2, it asks them to remove their loan contingency at that point. But the reality of, if this was the case, that loan contingency is actually going to have to be reworked. If they were depending on the equity of their home to buy this property, and now they're going to have a smaller down payment, they're going to need some time to rework that loan and get a new loan established to be able to buy the home. I don't know, that would just take way too much risk on the buyer to do that one, and then provide sufficient evidence of funds. So the second thing I recommend for this addendum is to eliminate that 6A2. If the buyer does agree to remove this contingency with the seller's demand, they're not going to have to remove their loan contingency at the same time. They will have to agree on a new period of time for that loan contingency. If you're using this form for a seller's replacement property, the contingency, the way it reads is, it's contingent on the seller entering a contract. So if we're following the form as it's written, the day the seller signs a contract for the replacement home, they are supposed to be removing this contingency, and then all the time frames for this current contract would begin. Very few sellers, if they're insisting on a replacement home contingency in the first place, very few sellers are comfortable with removing the contingency as soon as they sign the contract. I say, well, what if my inspections turn up something? What if it doesn't appraise? So most sellers want at least some time to make sure that they actually want to buy the home that they've written a contract on. And so, again, what we can do, and there's various ways to do it, but if we were going to write an addendum for that seller, we would say the agreement is contingent on the entering of the contract and seller's release of either just the investigation contingency, the investigation and appraisal contingency, whatever level of comfort we need to provide there. And then the seller will remove this contingency in writing either by the time what we've put into the contract or within a day of when they release their contingencies on the replacement contract. Is there still a risk that the seller's replacement property deal could fall through? Yes, but it's a matter of balancing the risk. CAR is actually, with the new forms coming out in November, are actually splitting this contract into two separate forms. There will be a buyer's contingency form and there will be the replacement property form. And one of the things they're proposing to add into this replacement property form is an option for the seller to have this stay on for a concurrent closing and actually have the contingency be based on the closing of their replacement property. I see some problems with that, and that typically the seller is buying the replacement property on contingency, and this first deal is going to have to close first. It can't close second, obviously. So I think they're going to have some issues with that. But in essence, that tells the buyer of this home that they have to accept the risk that at the very end of escrow, their whole deal could fall apart. So to me, you want to look for a win-win situation. You want to look for a way to balance the risks and give them the protections that they want. I've got all these forms, these samples, and my notes on these samples available as a PDF. So if anytime you want to send me an email, I will shoot you a copy of this so you can have them for reference. And you can email me at Stephen Rowe Realtor, STEVENROWE Realtor @gmail.com. All right. Thanks for the opportunity, Jeff, and I hope this been helpful.
Let's talk about this a little bit, Steve. That was a great presentation, and I want to encourage anybody that has questions to go ahead and queue them up, and we'll start addressing those questions. I want to get these. We're going to get these forms onto. I'd like to put them on our Facebook group. There's a section there for documents. And if you can upload those, Steve, to our Facebook group, if for some reason you have to be a moderator, I can upload them for you. But Steve made some very good points. I just want to touch on them from my perspective. The first thing that was very important is if you can avoid using this form, avoid it. It's good counsel to talk to your client and say, look, like I'm in this situation right now. I've got a buyer, and he's selling his house. And we've been writing some contingent offers, and I told him, I said, people aren't going to take you very seriously, and it's proven to be true. I've run him around, shown him a lot of properties, and especially when we didn't have contingencies released on our sale. We have them released now, so it gives us a stronger situation. The other thing I really like is adding an addendum to the COP. That's something I've done on every one of these that I've done, and I index. You've got to index some of the requirements of the COP to things that are going on that your client is experiencing. For instance, when I was writing the offers on properties, I used that time frame language similar. And if you want to find good verbiage for the time frame language like that, and you don't have this form in front of you, a good place to reference is the short sale addendum. Paragraph 2 at the bottom of the page. It has a really good time frame addendum about the starting of obligations for the contract. So you can look at that and just reword it if you're in a pinch and you need kind of a template to go by. But writing an offer and having your offer accepted and your timelines for appraisal and other contingencies starting before your buyer who is a seller and has a property and that property hasn't had release of contingencies puts them in a situation where they're laying out money that they may never get back. So
exactly.
These are really good points, and I'm really glad to have Steve here to get a different perspective, because I would have said things maybe a little differently, but I think the content's the same, and I'm really surprised. We haven't compared notes on this, but I'm surprised at the language used on your addenda there, because it's very similar to what I've used, and I'm really grateful for that. So do we have any questions here that have come up, Victoria?
One of
Yeah.
the comments I wanted to make is that what buyers and sellers don't realize is the amount of money that they lose when they insist on going with the contingency. Because typically for a seller to accept a home with a contingency, from the buyer, it either means that the home is overpriced and this is the only way they're going to get the price that they want, or it's so unusual that there's very few buyers that actually want it. I mean, that happens as well. But typically if a seller has a contingent offer in front of them and they have a non-contingent offer even for less money, they will often accept the non-contingent offer just because it's more certain.
Oh, absolutely. The only exception to that would be if you're in a really, really strong buyer's market and there's so much inventory that, people don't have only a ghost of a chance of getting their house sold.
Sure.
But you're absolutely right.
But at the same time, that buyer is in the same market as that seller. So
Correct.
The buyer is going to have the same difficulty selling their home as the seller who is, willing to accept a contingency. And that's where you end up getting contingencies stacked on top of each other.
Correct. Yeah, in a market like that, hopefully we don't see that. The last company I was at, we had one where they had 6 daisy chained together, and it was just a disaster. And that
most
to me,
I've seen was 4, but that was tough.
That's a recipe for your brains leaking out of your ears. So it's very complicated. So Victoria, we have some questions out there.
Yes, we do. Could you go over the addendum wording one more time, please? That's on here. There we go.
And we will make copies of this available.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Again, my recommendation, if you've got a contingency for the home that's or that's listed but not yet in escrow, the 2 things that I'm looking at doing is delaying the time frames so that your buyer is not immediately putting out money for inspections and appraisals and those things until they're able to get their home into escrow. So that would be the one. And then the second is just it doesn't make sense for a buyer to be asked, if they do end up falling under that clause of the seller saying remove the contingency or quit, to have to remove their loan contingency at that point just doesn't make any sense. They're actually, the loan is going to become more important to the process, not less important. And so that's my recommendation, is to deal with that one piece of the contract where it says they need to remove their loan contingency at the same time as they remove this contingency.
And let me add that your client is not going to understand this. You're going to have to really explain this to them in detail and take some time. Don't just write it up and shoot it over to them or stick it in front of them at the kitchen table and have them sign it. Send it over to them, let them have a good look at it, and review it with them and answer their questions. And you may have to draw, you may have to get to the point of diagramming it on another piece of paper and write it, this is going to happen here, this is going to happen here. I had an agent call me about one of these, and I wasn't sure that he understood it, so I asked him, I want you to write me an email and explain to me in your own words what you're doing here. Because if you can explain it to me in an email, you can explain it to somebody else. So if you guys have any questions about these, don't guess. This is an area where there's a lot. It's fraught with problems. So any other questions we have out there, Victoria?
Yes, we have one for Frank. Does Movement Mortgage underwrite prior to having a contract?
Yes, we do. That's an excellent question. That's one of the value adds that we offer. We will actually fully credit underwrite a file well in advance of you even getting in the car with your borrower, so that we can, one, set clear expectations for you as well as your client. Additionally, every time, once that loan is approved, our proactive loan officers will then typically work with the borrowers over a 72-hour period to meet all of the conditions, so that once they're signed off, you have a borrower that's really as good as cash. And at that point, the only thing they have to focus on with you is finding a property, making an offer that they're comfortable with, and worrying about the homeowner's insurance that they're going to put on the property. Additionally, each time you write an offer, our movement mortgage loan officers will reach out specifically to those listing agents to validate the integrity of our approval. In addition, provide any additional documentation they require to make them comfortable, be it proof of funds, the actual underwriter's condition sheet with everything signed off. We've become very adept, if you will, for lack of a better term, of selling this to the listing agents, and it's very effective in helping getting offers accepted, particularly in situations where we have low inventory, and it would be particularly applicable with the scenario that was mentioned earlier about the borrower who's writing offers while at the same time it's contingent on him selling his other home. We could certainly work within that scenario as well to make the borrowers attractive. But to answer the original questions, yes, we do fully underwrite files as TBDs without properties.
Great. Okay. And we have another question here. Steve, could you repeat your email address one more time?
Sure. It's Stephen Rowe Realtor, STEVEN ROWE Realtor @gmail.com.
Let me add to that. If you ever need to find the contact information for any one of our agents, you can go to our national website, which is Allison James Inc. AllisonJamesINC.com, and there is a section for agents. You can drop down and you can search by their last name, first name, or you can scroll through the whole roster. Do we have any other questions?
Is this webinar being recorded? Yes, it is. If you would like a copy of this webinar, shoot me over an email. My email address is agents, that's AGENTS, @AJIcorporate.com.
All right. Any other questions?
I don't believe so. I think that is it.
Okay, so let's just do a quick wrap on this. Thanks so much for joining us and helping and being a guest presenter, Steve. If you are an agent that has ideas that you'd like to share, maybe you have something you think would benefit the entire group, let me know. I'll also be reaching out to some agents to see who has some great topics to discuss. And if you have further questions on this, if you're writing one of these and you want to, you're not sure, let me know. I'm happy to walk you through it. I've done several myself and overseen a lot of them as broker. So I want to wish you all the best, great selling in this fall season, because we're just at the cusp of a change of the market. And I wish you all the very best, and that's it. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.